They say silence is golden. For 10 years, my silence was not golden. It was armor. Heavy, cold armor I wore every single day in my own daughter's home. My son-in-law, Richard Davenport, the man our town saw as a charming leader, a pillar of the community, had another name for me when he thought I could not hear, when my back was turned, or when he was speaking sotto voce to my daughter Emily across the dinner table. He called me the burden. He would say it with a sigh sometimes, a little puff of exasperation aimed at the ceiling. Other times, it was a sneer, quick and ugly, that vanished before Emily could catch it. Occasionally, especially after a couple of glasses of wine when his guard was down, it came out with a short, sharp laugh, as if the absurdity of my continued presence was just too much to bear. He thought I was just a frail old woman, 72 years young as they say, fading away into a gentle, deaf oblivion. He pictured me nodding and smiling vaguely, lost in memories, a harmless piece of antique furniture in the corner of his perfectly curated life. He never imagined that my late husband Arthur's watch, ticking faithfully on my wrist, was not just telling time. It was recording. It was bearing witness. For years it had been diligently documenting every single poisoned word, every dismissive gesture captured in the shifts of tone, every calculated sigh meant to wound. If you are listening to this story, thank you so much for being here. Let us know where you are joining us from in the world, and do not forget to subscribe to become part of our growing community. My life had not always been like this, lived in the shadow of someone else's ambition and resentment. Before Richard, before the quiet house that felt more like a museum than a home, there was Arthur. My Arthur. We had 45 years together, 45 years of partnership, of laughter that echoed in a house filled with warmth, not just expensive furnishings. He was a history professor, a kind man with twinkling eyes who saw me, truly saw me, even when I felt invisible to the rest of the world. He was the one who gave me the watch. It was for our 25th anniversary, a beautiful classic timepiece with a simple gold band and a tiny inscription on the back, "Always A." It felt solid and reassuring on my wrist, a tangible link to our shared past. When Arthur passed away suddenly from a heart attack 12 years ago, the silence he left behind was deafening, a stark contrast to the quiet I now endured. The house felt too big, too empty. Emily, my only child, was already married to Richard then. They lived in this sprawling, immaculate house in the nicer part of town, the kind with manicured lawns and important-looking cars in the driveway. Richard was already a city councilman then, a rising star, people called him. He had that politician's smile, wide and bright, but it never quite reached his eyes, not when he looked at me anyway. It was Richard's idea, really, for me to move in. He framed it as the perfect solution, presented it to Emily with such apparent generosity. "She shouldn't be alone in that big house, Em," I overheard him saying one evening, his voice smooth as butter. "It makes sense for her to be here, with family. We have the space." Emily, bless her heart, wants to see the good in everyone, especially her husband. She readily agreed, relieved, I think, that her mother would be looked after. And so, I sold the house filled with Arthur's memories, packed my life into a few boxes, and moved into the guest suite downstairs. At first, it seemed workable. The suite was pleasant enough, overlooking a small, meticulously kept garden. I had my books, my knitting, my memories. I tried to be useful, helping with laundry, offering to cook dinners that were usually politely declined in favor of takeout or catered meals for Richard's endless stream of political acquaintances. I made myself small. I learned the rhythm of the house, when Richard held meetings in his study, when he and Emily entertained, when it was best for me to simply retreat to my room with a book and pretend I did not exist. The comments started subtly. A heavy sigh when I asked for help, reaching something on a high shelf. An impatient drumming of fingers on the table if I took too long to formulate a sentence. Then came the whispers to Emily, just loud enough for me to catch snippets if I strained. "Is your mother all right? She seems a bit slow today." Or, "Does she really need to sit with us when the Harrisons are over?" The first time I heard him call me the burden outright was about 2 years after I moved in. He was on the phone in the hallway, his voice low but sharp with frustration. He was talking to Emily, who must have been upstairs. "I cannot deal with this tonight, Emily. The fundraising dinner is tomorrow, and I have got the burden asking me about replacing a light bulb. Can you handle it?" The word hit me like a physical blow. Burden. Not Mom, not Grace, not even Mrs. Peterson. Just the burden. Something heavy, unwanted, something to be managed. That night, something shifted in me. The grief for Arthur was still there, a constant ache, but now it mingled with a cold, quiet anger. I looked down at the watch on my wrist, Arthur's watch. He had always been fascinated by gadgets. He had shown me once, years ago, how this particular watch had a discrete voice recording function. "For remembering important lecture points, Gracie," he had chuckled. I had never used it, until that night. Sitting alone in my room, the overheard insult echoing in the silence, I fumbled with the small button on the side. A tiny red light, almost invisible, blinked twice. I did not know why I did it, not really. Maybe I just needed proof. Proof that I was not imagining the cruelty, the dismissal. Proof that this charming public servant was something else entirely behind closed doors. Over the next few years, the recording became a habit, a silent act of self-preservation. Richard's contempt became less veiled. He seemed to decide that I was becoming progressively deaf, a convenient assumption that allowed him to speak more freely in my presence. I did not correct him. In fact, I leaned into it. I started asking people to repeat themselves more often. I would cup my hand to my ear. I would sometimes nod and smile vaguely when he spoke directly to me, letting him believe his words floated past unheard. My feigned deafness became my shield, and Arthur's watch became my hidden recorder, capturing the casual cruelty, the growing arrogance, the careless talk of deals and favors that seemed to grease the wheels of his political ambition. I would transfer the recordings late at night, huddled over an old laptop Arthur had left me, carefully labeling the digital files on small memory cards I kept hidden in an old sewing box. Insults, campaign finance talk, dismissals. It was a grim catalog of my life in their house. Emily remained oblivious, or perhaps willfully blind. She loved me, I knew she did, in her own way. But she was caught in Richard's orbit, intimidated by his forceful personality, and desperate to maintain the facade of a perfect marriage. When I tried, gently, to express my unhappiness early on, she would get flustered. "Oh, Mom, Richard does not mean it like that. He is just under a lot of stress with work. You know how he is." She became adept at smoothing things over, at changing the subject, at pretending not to hear the barbs he threw my way. Her denial was its own kind of pain, a quiet betrayal that hurt almost as much as Richard's open scorn. Life settled into this uneasy pattern. Richard's political star continued to rise. He was charismatic, knew how to work a room, how to say all the right things to the right people. Our town admired him. They saw the successful councilman, the devoted husband, the man poised for greater things. They did not see the man who sighed with impatience when his elderly mother-in-law moved too slowly, the man who referred to her as baggage behind her back. Then about 3 months ago, The whispers turned into a roar. Richard announced he was running for mayor. The campaign launch was a grand affair held right there in their large, manicured backyard. Tents were erected, caterers bustled, local dignitaries mingled. Richard stood at a makeshift podium, Emily beaming proudly beside him, and delivered a rousing speech about community, integrity, and family values. He even gave a nod to me, seated deliberately in a chair slightly off to the side. "And I am so grateful for the support of my entire family," he declared, gesturing vaguely in my direction, "including Emily's wonderful mother, Grace, who lives with us." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and the caterers were packing up, I was in the hallway, heading towards my room. The door to Richard's study was slightly ajar. I heard his voice, sharp and businesslike, talking to his campaign manager. My feet slowed. I leaned closer, pretending to adjust a picture frame on the wall. "Look, Frank," Richard was saying, his voice stripped of its earlier warmth. "We need to manage the mother-in-law situation carefully during the campaign. She is a liability, an unpredictable element." There was a pause. Then chillingly, "Maybe it is time to seriously look into those nicer retirement communities. You know, the ones with memory care, just proactively, after the election, of course." A cold dread washed over me. Liability, retirement community, memory care. He was not just insulting me anymore, he was planning to dispose of me, to tuck me away neatly out of sight, once I was no longer needed as a prop for his family values charade. My greatest fear, being shipped off, isolated, forgotten, was not just a fear. It was part of his strategic plan. That night, sleep was impossible. The air in my room felt thick, suffocating. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, the watch ticking steadily on my wrist. Then I stood up and went to the closet. From the back, hidden beneath old sweaters, I pulled out the antique sewing box. Inside, nestled amongst spools of thread and buttons, were the small, labeled memory cards. Dozens of them now, accumulated over nearly a decade. I inserted one into the slot on my old laptop. I put on the headphones Arthur used to use when grading papers, the foam padding worn smooth over the years. I clicked on a file, dated 5 years ago. Richard's voice filled my ears, laced with irritation, talking to Emily. "Just sits there like a piece of furniture taking up space. Honestly, Em, how long do we have to put up with this?" I clicked on another, more recent. Drain on resources. The medical bills alone. Another, from just 6 months ago, a phone call I had only partially caught at the time. "Don't worry, Johnson will get his zoning variance once I am in office. Just make sure the donation comes through the PAC, keep it clean." Zoning variance. PAC donation? It was not just the personal insults anymore. It was the casual corruption, the arrogance of a man who believed he was untouchable. For years, I had recorded his words as a defense, as proof to myself that I was not crazy. But now, listening to the cold, calculated cruelty, the hints of potentially illegal dealings, a new feeling began to dawn. This was not just a shield anymore. This was evidence. This was power. The power he thought I could never possess. A decision formed, hard and clear, in the lonely silence of the night. I would not go quietly into some nicer retirement community. I would not be disposed of like inconvenient luggage. Richard had underestimated me for the last time. He thought his campaign launch was the beginning of his ascent. He had no idea it was the signal for me to finally begin my own campaign. A campaign for truth. Meticulously documented, one secret recording at a time, the silent witness was finally ready to speak. The decision made in the dead of night felt different in the morning light, not less firm, but heavier. It was one thing to resolve to fight back. It was another entirely to figure out how. I was 72 years old. My technical skills were limited to sending emails and occasionally looking up recipes online. Richard, on the other hand, was surrounded by slick campaign staff, lawyers, people who knew how to navigate the treacherous waters of politics and public relations. What could I realistically do? My first challenge was practical. While Arthur's watch recorded faithfully, getting the files onto the laptop and organized was a slow, nerve-wracking process. I had to wait until the house was completely quiet, usually well after midnight, or seize opportunities when both Richard and Emily were out for extended periods. I would carry the laptop, the watch, and my little box of memory cards into the downstairs bathroom, the only room with a lock I felt truly secure using, and hunch over the closed toilet lid, peering at the screen in the dim light from the hallway. Transferring the files took time, my fingers sometimes fumbling with the small buttons and cables. More than once, I heard footsteps approach the bathroom door, my heart leaping into my throat as I scrambled to shut the laptop and pretend I was simply using the facilities. One afternoon, Emily knocked softly. "Mom, are you okay in there? You have been a while." I quickly splashed water on my face, flushed the toilet for effect, and opened the door, forcing a calm smile. "Just resting my eyes a bit, dear. Feeling a little tired." She gave me a concerned look, but did not push it. Close calls like that made me more cautious, more meticulous. I started deleting the files from the watch immediately after transfer, ensuring the device itself held nothing incriminating if it were ever discovered or malfunctioned. I developed a simple code for file names using dates and keywords only I would understand, like kitchen remark or study call. Beyond the technical hurdles, I needed information. If I was going to challenge Richard, I needed to understand the landscape he operated in. I started spending more time at the public library, initially under the guise of borrowing large print novels. There, I used their computers, feeling safer than on my own easily accessible laptop at home. I searched for articles about Richard's campaign, his voting record on the city council, his known associates, and I researched his main opponent, Councilman Miller. From what I could gather online and from snippets in the local paper, Miller seemed like a decent, if somewhat uncharismatic, career politician. He emphasized transparency and community engagement, a stark contrast to Richard's polished ambition. He did not seem like the type to engage in dirty tricks himself, which made me think he might be receptive to legitimate information about his opponent's lack of integrity. But could I trust him? Sending anonymous information was risky. What if he dismissed it? What if he somehow traced it back to me? What if he used it in a way that inadvertently exposed me before I was ready? The questions swirled, making my head ache. Meanwhile, Richard's campaign machine kicked into high gear. Lawn signs bearing his smiling face seemed to sprout overnight all across town. He gave interviews, attended town halls, kissed babies. The whole performance. He was good at it, I had to admit. He projected confidence, capability, and that all-important relatability. At home, however, the pressure cooker environment intensified. His smiles were tighter, his patience thinner. He became even more dismissive, barely acknowledging my presence unless absolutely necessary. He seemed increasingly convinced of my deafness and irrelevance, which, paradoxically, made my secret task easier. He would take phone calls right in the living room, pacing back and forth, discussing strategy or donations, apparently assuming I was lost in my own world. And Arthur's watch kept listening. I knew the personal insults, the years of being called a burden, while deeply wounding to me, might not be enough to derail a political campaign. People might dismiss it as private family friction, or worse, paint me as a bitter old woman. I needed something concrete, something that spoke to his character as a public servant, not just a son-in-law. The mention of the Johnson zoning variance I had recorded earlier echoed in my mind. It felt significant, but vague. I needed more. The opportunity came unexpectedly one Tuesday afternoon. Richard had come home early, agitated about some campaign scheduling conflict. He retreated into his study off the main living room, leaving the door slightly ajar as he often did, perhaps subconsciously enjoying the idea that his important work was audible, even if not understood by the household. I was in the kitchen, ostensibly washing lettuce for a salad Emily might or might not eat for dinner. My ears, however, were tuned to the hallway. I heard him pick up the phone, his voice initially low and controlled. I activated the recording function on my watch, the tiny vibration against my skin, a familiar secret signal. I dried my hands slowly, then even more slowly began walking towards the living room, planning to dust the bookshelves near his study door. As I drew closer, his voice became clearer, sharper. "Look, Johnson, I told you it is handled," Richard snapped into the phone. My breath caught. Johnson. This was it. I stopped by a tall bookshelf, fiddling with a ceramic bird, pretending to examine it for dust, positioning myself just outside the partially open door. The donation was generous, yes, very generous, and appreciated. A pause. Richard listened, his face tightening. "No, I cannot put anything in writing before the election. Are you crazy? That is not how this works, and you know it." He lowered his voice slightly, but the anger was still palpable. "Listen to me. The Riverside zoning variance you need, the one the Planning Commission keeps stalling on, it requires mayoral approval to expedite. Once I am in office, consider it expedited. We have a clear understanding. That large, untraceable contribution through the Citizens for Progress PAC was your demonstration of faith. My signature on that variance will be mine." Another pause. "Just keep your nerve, Johnson, and keep your mouth shut. Nobody needs to connect the dots. It is just good business, mutually beneficial." My heart was pounding against my ribs. He had just laid it all out, the quid pro quo. The large, deliberately obscured donation, funneled through a political action committee. The explicit promise to use the power of the mayor's office to benefit a specific donor in exchange for that money. This was not just unethical, it felt blatantly illegal. I stood frozen, terrified he would suddenly look up and see me lurking there, terrified someone else would walk in. My hand trembled slightly as I adjusted the ceramic bird. He finished the call abruptly with a curt, "We are clear then. Goodbye." The click of the receiver sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet house. I forced myself to move, to continue my slow dusting charade further into the living room, away from his door, before retreating back towards the kitchen. My mind was racing. I had it. Clean, undeniable proof of corruption. Later that evening, locked securely in the downstairs bathroom once more, I transferred the file. Listening back through the headphones, the conversation was chillingly clear. Richard's impatient, arrogant tone, the specific mention of the PAC, the zoning variance, the explicit link between the money and the official action. The mask of the devoted public servant had not just slipped, it had been ripped off, revealing the greedy, cynical politician beneath. And my little watch, Arthur's faithful gift, had caught it all. This was not just about personal slights anymore, not just about being called a burden. This was about betraying the public trust, about selling out the office he so desperately coveted before he even occupied it. He thought his secrets were safe behind closed doors, discussed in hushed, angry tones. He never accounted for the silent witness just feet away, the one he had dismissed as deaf and irrelevant. The question now was, what could I, a supposedly frail old woman, actually do with such dangerous information? Holding it felt like holding a lit match. The weight of that recording pressed on me in the following days. Richard's campaign, meanwhile, seemed to be hitting its stride. He secured a key endorsement from the Chamber of Commerce. His rallies were well attended. He debated Councilman Miller on local radio, coming across as polished and dynamic, easily batting away Miller's more policy-focused, less flashy arguments. Richard's confidence soared, bordering on outright arrogance. At home, this translated into an even shorter fuse. He started making more pointed comments to Emily about my care. "Are you sure she is managing okay on her own, Em? I saw her nearly trip on the rug yesterday." Or, "Maybe we should have that nice Dr. Ramirez come by, just for a wellness check." He was laying the groundwork, planting seeds of doubt in Emily's mind, preparing her for the eventual suggestion of a more suitable environment for me. Emily looked increasingly stressed, caught between her husband's relentless campaign and her mother's quiet, persistent presence. The tension culminated at a large fundraising dinner Richard and Emily hosted at their home. It was exactly the kind of event I dreaded: crowds of people I did not know, loud chatter, the pressure to appear pleasant and invisible simultaneously. Richard insisted I be there, another prop for his carefully constructed image. "Of course, Mom will join us," he had boomed when Emily tentatively asked if perhaps I might prefer to rest. I sat in an armchair in a corner of the sprawling living room, nursing a glass of water, watching Richard glad hand his way through the crowd. He was magnetic, turning on the charm, laughing, shaking hands, clapping backs. At one point, he was standing near me with a small group of potential donors, wealthy-looking men in expensive suits. He gestured towards me with his champagne flute, a dismissive flick of the wrist. I saw one of the men glance my way. Richard leaned in conspiratorially, his voice lowered, but carrying in a brief lull in the surrounding noise. "Oh, that is just Emily's mother," he said, a condescending chuckle in his voice. "Practically deaf, bless her heart. Nice little piece of decor, mostly, does not follow much." He thought I could not hear. He thought I was furniture. Decor. In that moment, sitting there, publicly diminished, any lingering hesitation I had about using the recordings vanished. The anger, cold and sharp, solidified into pure resolve. He had provided the motivation. Now I had the means. The lit match I was holding suddenly felt like a torch. It was time to find out if Councilman Miller was ready to feel the heat. The sting of Richard's words at the fundraiser, "practically deaf," "piece of decor," echoed long after the last guest departed. It was the final push I needed. Holding onto the Johnson recording felt less like possessing a weapon and more like carrying a burden of my own, a heavy weight of complicity if I did nothing. The time for silent observation was over. It was time to act, however risky it might be. The next morning, I told Emily I was not feeling well and wanted to spend the day resting in my room. It was partly true. The emotional turmoil had left me drained, but it also gave me the solitude I needed. Once Emily had left for a luncheon and Richard was, presumably, at his campaign headquarters, I retrieved the memory card containing the Johnson bribery recording. I put on an old coat and hat, tucking my library card into my pocket. Walking the few blocks to the public library felt like walking towards an unknown precipice. My steps were steady, but my pulse fluttered like a trapped bird. Inside the library, the familiar quiet hum of computers and turning pages was usually comforting. Today, it felt charged with nervous energy. I found an unoccupied computer terminal in a relatively secluded carrel. My hands felt clumsy on the unfamiliar keyboard. Following instructions I had carefully written down from online tutorials viewed previously, I created a new anonymous email address through a secure service, something untraceable, using a nonsensical name like Observer123. Then came the hardest part, composing the message. What should I say? Too much detail might reveal my identity. Too little, and it might be dismissed. I settled on something brief and direct. Subject: information regarding Richard Davenport's campaign ethics. To the campaign manager for Councilman Miller, the attached audio file contains a conversation involving Richard Davenport discussing potentially illegal campaign finance activities and promising political favors in exchange for donations. Please review carefully. This information is provided by a concerned citizen wishing to remain anonymous. My finger hovered over the Attach File button. I selected the Johnson recording from the memory card I had plugged into the USB port. The file name was innocuous, just a string of numbers. Uploading it felt momentous, irreversible. I took a deep breath and clicked Send. The email vanished into the digital ether. I quickly logged out, cleared the browser history as instructed, removed my memory card, and shut down the computer. Walking out of the library and back into the bright sunlight, I felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. I had crossed the Rubicon. There was no going back now. I had fired the first shot, aimed directly at the heart of Richard's ambition. Whether it hit the mark or exploded in my own face remained to be seen. That same week, as if the universe sought to heighten the drama, Richard's campaign received a major boost. The city's largest newspaper, previously neutral, published a glowing editorial endorsing him for mayor. They praised his vision, his energy, his supposed business acumen demonstrated during his time on the council. The article lauded his commitment to progress and implicitly dismissed Councilman Miller as steady but perhaps too cautious for the city's future needs. Richard was ecstatic. He waved the newspaper around at breakfast, his smugness almost unbearable. See, Emily? Even the Chronicle gets it. People are ready for real leadership, not more bureaucratic shuffling. He barely glanced at me, humming confidently as he poured his coffee. His surge in public approval made my anonymous email feel like a tiny pebble thrown against a fortress wall. Had I done enough? Had I acted too late? The days that followed were agonizingly slow. I checked the anonymous Observer123 email account compulsively from the library computers whenever I could slip away. Inbox, 0 messages. Had Miller's campaign even received it? Did they listen? Did they believe it? Or did they dismiss it as a prank, a desperate smear tactic from an unknown source? Doubt gnawed at me. Richard, buoyed by the endorsement and positive poll numbers, grew even more expansive in his public persona and more dismissive in private. He started talking more openly about his plans for the mayor's office, the changes he would make, the people he would appoint. His arrogance seemed boundless. Then, about a week after I sent the email, something shifted. Councilman Miller was a guest on a popular local morning radio talk show. I listened intently on the small radio in my room, my knitting lying forgotten in my lap. The host asked Miller about the differences between his approach and Richard Davenport's. Miller spoke calmly about policy for a few minutes, then paused. "You know," he said, his tone becoming more pointed, "there is a lot of talk about Mr. Davenport's connections to big developers. Specifically, questions have been raised about his relationship with Mr. Johnson of Johnson Properties and promises allegedly made regarding the disputed Riverside zoning variance." My breath hitched. He did not say he had proof. He did not mention an audio recording. He framed it as questions being raised, skillfully planting a seed of doubt without revealing his source. The host, sensing controversy, pressed him. "Are you suggesting impropriety, Councilman?" Miller sidestepped deftly. I am suggesting that voters deserve complete transparency about who is funding campaigns and what access or promises that funding might secure. It is a legitimate area for inquiry. Richard, who happened to be driving to a meeting and listening to the show, apparently nearly drove off the road. He arrived home that evening in a foul mood. "Did you hear Miller on the radio?" he demanded of Emily the moment he walked in, slamming his briefcase onto the hall table. "Where the hell did he get that Johnson stuff? Someone's leaking. Is it someone on my staff? Frank's team?" He paced the living room, agitated. That zoning thing was supposed to be airtight, handled quietly after the election. He shot a suspicious glance around the room, his eyes even briefly flicking towards me before dismissing me as irrelevant. But the seed of paranoia had been sown. He was rattled. The pebble, it seemed, had caused a ripple after all. The radio incident changed the atmosphere in the house. Richard became more watchful, more suspicious of everyone. His demands on Emily increased. She had to accompany him to more events, stand beside him looking supportive, project the image of unwavering unity. Her smiles looked increasingly strained. His irritation, previously directed mostly at me, now seemed to simmer constantly beneath the surface, ready to boil over at the slightest provocation. He started keeping his study door firmly closed when making calls. He became more guarded with his phone and laptop. This new level of stress and suspicion seemed to make him careless in other ways. He started coming home later some evenings, smelling faintly of unfamiliar perfume, offering vague excuses about late meetings or campaign strategy sessions. Emily, preoccupied with the demands of the campaign and likely unwilling to confront another potential problem, seemed not to notice, or chose not to. But I noticed. Arthur's watch, unfortunately, could not record scents or locations, only sounds within its range. One Thursday evening, the tension reached a new peak. Richard had been on edge all day after a difficult meeting with campaign donors. He had a brief, heated phone call in the hallway, his voice hushed but angry, mentioning canceled plans and someone being unreasonable. He ended the call abruptly, grabbed his keys and headed for the door, calling back to Emily. "Gotta meet Frank to put out a fire. Won't be late." He seemed flustered, preoccupied. In his haste, he left his personal tablet lying on the end table next to his armchair in the living room. I was sitting in my usual spot, reading. The house fell quiet after Richard left. Emily went upstairs to take a bath. A few minutes later, the screen of the tablet suddenly lit up with a notification banner across the top. It was a message preview. Normally, I would never pry. My battle was with Richard's public corruption and his treatment of me, not his private life beyond its impact on my daughter. But the name displayed next to the message caught my eye. Jessica. It was accompanied by a message preview that read, "Last night was amazing. Missing you already. Same time next week? Let me know soon. XOXO." My blood ran cold. Jessica, with a heart emoji, the casual intimacy, the reference to last night, the planning for a future rendezvous. It was unmistakable. This was not a campaign associate named Jessica. This was something else. My first instinct was anger, not just at Richard's betrayal of Emily, but at his sheer hypocrisy. The man preaching family values on the campaign trail, the man using his wife as a prop, was actively engaged in an affair. My second instinct was calculation. This was another layer of his deceit, another facet of his character that the public, and more importantly, Emily, deserved to know. But how? Telling Emily directly might shatter her, and she might not even believe me, dismissing it as another attempt by her difficult mother to cause trouble. I needed proof. Tangible proof. My heart pounded. Emily could come downstairs any minute. Richard could realize he forgot his tablet and return. I looked at the tablet screen, still glowing faintly. The notification had disappeared, but the possibility of more messages, emails, photos, it was right there. But I could not risk trying to guess his passcode. Then I remembered my own phone, resting on the table beside me. With trembling hands, I picked up my phone and opened the camera app. I leaned over the tablet, angling my phone just right. The screen lit up again as another message from Jessica arrived. "Don't forget about deleting our chat history. Be careful." I quickly snapped a picture of the screen, capturing both message previews, the sender's name with the incriminating heart emoji clearly visible. The flash was off, the shutter sound silent. Just as I pulled my phone back, I heard the telltale creak of the floorboards upstairs as Emily moved around in the bathroom. My hands shook as I slipped my phone back into my pocket. I quickly glanced at the tablet, ensuring it looked undisturbed. I retreated to my armchair, picking up my book, though the words swam meaninglessly before my eyes. Emily came downstairs a few minutes later, wrapped in a robe, her face drawn. She glanced at the tablet but seemed not to register its presence, her mind clearly elsewhere. She gave me a weak smile and headed towards the kitchen to make tea. I sat there, the secret image burning a hole in my phone's memory and my conscience. He was not just cruel and corrupt. He was weaving a web of lies that ensnared my daughter, too. Looking at the picture later that night, safely in my room, the smiling selfies Jessica had likely sent him stored somewhere in their chat history, the casual disregard for his marriage vows laid bare in those flippant messages, my resolve hardened into something colder, sharper. My fight was no longer just for my own dignity or even just about exposing his political corruption. It was now tangled with protecting Emily, whether she knew it or not, from the man who was systematically betraying her trust on every level. But revealing this secret, this deeply personal betrayal, could shatter her world completely. How could I expose the truth about Richard Davenport, the aspiring mayor, the cruel son-in-law, the unfaithful husband, without causing irreparable damage to the daughter I still loved? The path ahead suddenly seemed even more fraught with peril. The final televised debate between Richard and Councilman Miller was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening. It was billed as the decisive event of the campaign, the last chance for voters to see the candidates side by side before Election Day, just a week later. The anticipation in the city was palpable, and in the Davenport household the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Richard oscillated between bursts of manic energy, practicing sound bites in front of mirrors, and periods of brooding suspicion, snapping at Emily and his campaign staff over minor details. Emily looked like a ghost, pale and withdrawn, dutifully playing her role, but clearly fraying at the edges. The night before the debate, I sat alone in my room, the door closed, the rest of the house finally quiet. Spread out on my small desk, illuminated by the weak glow of my bedside lamp, was the culmination of 10 years of silent endurance. The old laptop displaying the coded list of audio files, the small collection of memory cards, and my phone showing the stark photographic evidence of Richard's infidelity. I clicked open a file labeled Burden Dinner Wire 8. Richard's voice, smooth and condescending, filled my ears through the headphones. "Honestly, Em, it is like having a child again, but without any of the cute parts, just the endless neediness, a constant burden." I clicked on another. Decor, our fundraiser, recent. Practically deaf, bless her heart. Nice little piece of decor, mostly. Each word was a small, sharp prick against old wounds. Then I listened again to the Johnson call, the naked greed and corruption in his voice. Finally, I stared at the image on my phone, Jessica, and her incriminating messages. A wave of profound weariness washed over me, heavier than any fatigue I had felt before. What was I doing? I had set out to reclaim my dignity, to expose the truth about the man who had belittled me for a decade. But the path I was on felt increasingly destructive, not just to Richard, but potentially to Emily, to the fragile peace I had sought for so long. Was this justice, or was it just vengeance? A bitter, lonely old woman lashing out because her feelings were hurt. The thought made me feel sick. Richard was cruel, yes. Corrupt, almost certainly. Unfaithful, clearly. But was orchestrating his public humiliation the right way to handle it? What gave me the right to detonate his life, and by extension, Emily's? She was still my daughter. Despite her weakness, her inability to stand up to him, she was still my child. Seeing her husband exposed as a fraud, a cheat, possibly a criminal, on live television, would it free her, or would it simply destroy her? The image of Emily's already strained face, crumpling in shame under the glare of the cameras, filled me with a deep, aching guilt. Maybe Richard was right. Maybe I was just a burden, a meddling old woman causing trouble where it was not warranted. Maybe the kindest thing, the most dignified thing, was to simply let it go. To delete the files, destroy the memory cards, erase the picture from my phone, and retreat back into the silence he had assigned me. I could let the election happen. If Richard won, perhaps Emily would find some semblance of happiness in being the mayor's wife. If he lost, perhaps his ego would deflate, and things might even improve. My interference, my grand plan for vindication, suddenly seemed selfish, reckless, and terribly, terribly lonely. The weight of the secrets, the potential consequences, pressed down on me, suffocating me. For a terrifying moment, I genuinely considered abandoning everything. I could just stop. Let the silence win. My gaze fell upon Arthur's watch on my wrist, the gold worn smooth over the decades. Always, always. Arthur wouldn't have stood for this. Not the cruelty, not the corruption, not the deceit. He believed in integrity, in standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. He believed in protecting the people you loved, not by shielding them from hard truths, but by empowering them with honesty. I remembered something he used to tell his history students, a quote I had heard him repeat many times. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. I wasn't a man, and perhaps not entirely good, but I understood the sentiment. Doing nothing felt like a betrayal of Arthur's memory, a betrayal of the values he lived by, and ultimately, a betrayal of myself and even of Emily. Keeping silent wouldn't protect her. It would merely prolong her entanglement with a man who disrespected her, deceived her, and used her. It would mean allowing a corrupt man to potentially lead our city. It would mean accepting the label Richard had pinned on me, a piece of furniture, a silent, irrelevant burden. No. My silence had been armor, yes, but it had also been a cage. Recording Richard's words hadn't started as a plot for revenge. It had started as a desperate need to validate my own reality, to hold on to my sanity in the face of constant gaslighting. Now, those recordings represented more than just my personal pain. They represented the truth. And the truth, however painful, deserved to be heard. My motive wasn't purely vengeance, though perhaps a satisfying shred of it was woven in. My primary motive, I realized with sudden clarity, was to reclaim my voice, to speak the truth that had been silenced for far too long, and perhaps, in doing so, offer Emily a chance to see the man she married for who he truly was, away from the manipulation and control. The doubt and guilt receded, replaced by a calm, cold determination. I knew what I had to do. I wouldn't use everything, not all at once. The bribery recording had served its purpose with Councilman Miller. Let the official investigations handle that. The infidelity evidence. That was for Emily, perhaps, at a later private time. Hurting her publicly with that specific betrayal felt unnecessarily cruel, a different kind of weapon than the one I needed for this fight. For the televised debate, for the public reckoning, the most potent weapon was Richard's own hypocrisy. It was the stark contrast between the charming family man persona he projected and the dismissive, cruel way he spoke about me when he thought no one who mattered could hear. That was the narrative I would expose. I took a fresh USB drive, a small, sleek, silver one I had bought weeks ago in preparation. Carefully, meticulously, I selected only a few key audio files. The burden comment, the piece of decor insult at the fundraiser, a particularly cutting remark about my slowness hindering their social life. Another where he impatiently told Emily he didn't have time for her mother's rambling stories. I chose clips that were short, clear, and undeniably his voice, focused solely on his treatment of me, the supposed beneficiary of his familial generosity. I saved them onto the USB drive, labeling it simply Truth. The next morning, while Emily was out running errands and Richard was already gone, I walked to the payphone outside the corner store, a relic few people used anymore. My cell phone felt too traceable. Using a handful of coins, I dialed the number for the local television station hosting the debate. Disguising my voice slightly, making it sound older and more fluttery than usual, I explained that I was a senior citizen, a longtime resident, and I had some personal perspective on one of the candidates that I felt was important for the public to understand. I didn't elaborate, despite the producer's probing questions, merely insisting on my right as a citizen to attend the public debate. Perhaps intrigued, or perhaps just following policy for public access, they agreed to hold a ticket for me at the entrance under the name Grace Peterson. Holding that confirmation felt solid, real. The plan was in motion. That evening, I carefully chose my outfit. A simple, dark blue dress, respectable but unassuming. I pinned a small, modest brooch, one Arthur had given me, onto the collar. It felt like a small piece of him accompanying me. In the pocket of my lightweight coat, my fingers closed around the small, cool metal of the USB drive. It felt immensely heavy, laden with the weight of 10 years of silence, now poised to make a deafening noise. As I prepared to leave for the television studio, catching a taxi rather than relying on Emily or Richard, I glanced one last time at Arthur's watch, always A. It wasn't just a reminder of his love anymore. It felt like a promise. A promise to myself to speak the truth, whatever the cost. The stage was set for Richard's final performance. He practiced his lines about family values, about integrity, about community spirit, utterly unaware that the silent witness, the piece of decor, was heading towards the audience, holding the real script. His own words, ready to bring down the curtain on his meticulously constructed charade. There was no turning back now. The television studio buzzed with an electric energy, a mixture of media hype, political tension, and public curiosity. Finding my assigned seat in the audience felt surreal. It was several rows back, but with a clear view of the brightly lit stage where 2 podiums stood waiting. Technicians scurried about, checking microphones and cameras. The audience murmured, shifting in their seats. I saw Richard and Emily arrive backstage, Richard looking supremely confident, clapping his campaign manager on the back, while Emily offered a wan smile to a reporter. He did not see me. I was just another face in the crowd, exactly as planned. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the calm facade I tried to maintain. In my coat pocket, the small USB drive felt like a heavy stone. The lights dimmed, the theme music swelled, and the host, Sarah Jenkins, a polished professional with sharp eyes, welcomed the audience and introduced the candidates. Richard strode onto the stage with practiced ease, waving to the cheering section filled with his supporters. Councilman Miller followed, looking earnest and slightly less comfortable in the spotlight. The debate began, covering familiar territory: taxes, infrastructure, education. Richard was smooth, deflecting difficult questions, repeating his campaign slogans about progress and strong leadership. Miller was steady, citing facts and figures, highlighting Richard's sometimes vague proposals. He even alluded again, carefully, to the unanswered questions about campaign financing and developer influence, clearly referencing the information I had sent, but Richard brushed it off as desperate mudslinging. Time seemed to warp, stretching agonizingly during Miller's points, then compressing rapidly when Richard spoke. My palms felt damp. Was I really going to do this? Could I stand up, interrupt, make a scene in front of all these people, in front of the cameras? Then Sarah Jenkins shifted gears. "Let's turn to character, gentlemen," she announced. "It's something voters care deeply about. Mr. Davenport, you often speak about the importance of family, and I know your mother-in-law, Grace, lives with you and your wife. Can you share what that experience has taught you about compassion and community? It must be a wonderful example of family values in action." This was it, the moment I had both dreaded and anticipated. Richard beamed, leaning into the microphone, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "Sarah, thank you for asking. It's truly a privilege. Caring for Grace, Emily's wonderful mother, in our home. It's a daily reminder of what matters. She's such an integral part of our family, a source of wisdom, and ensuring her comfort and happiness is paramount for both Emily and myself. It teaches you patience, humility." He was still speaking, weaving his tapestry of lies, when I stood up. A few heads turned my way, annoyed at the interruption. My legs felt unsteady, but I forced them forward, walking down the aisle towards the stage. A security guard started to move towards me, but I kept my eyes fixed on Sarah Jenkins. The cameras, sensing unexpected movement, swiveled in my direction. Richard faltered mid-sentence, his eyes widening in disbelief as he recognized me. The confident mask cracked, revealing a flicker of panic. "Excuse me, Mr. Jenkins," I said, my voice surprisingly clear and steady, amplified slightly by the stage microphones picking it up. The entire studio fell silent. Even the security guard hesitated. Richard paints a very touching picture. I reached the edge of the stage, stopping directly in front of Sarah Jenkins' desk, bypassing Richard completely. "But perhaps," I continued, my voice ringing with 10 years of suppressed truth, "it is time everyone heard the real story." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small silver USB drive. I placed it firmly on the desk in front of the startled host. "This," I announced, looking directly at the main camera, its red light suddenly feeling like a beacon of validation, "contains 10 years of the privilege of being cared for by Mr. Davenport," in his own words. Richard was speechless, his face paling to a sickly white. Emily, visible in the audience front row, looked utterly horrified, her hand flying to her mouth. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Sarah Jenkins, after a split second of stunned silence, recovered instantly. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, flickered from the USB drive to Richard's frozen expression, then back to me. She understood. Without a word, she signaled discreetly to the control booth. A moment later, Richard's voice, Not the smooth public voice, but the cold, dismissive one I knew so well, echoed through the studio's sound system. It was from the fundraiser recording. Practically deaf, bless her heart. Nice little piece of decor, mostly. Does not follow much. The silence that followed was absolute, profound. The contrast between the man standing on stage preaching family values and the voice sneering about his elderly mother-in-law was devastatingly stark. The camera zoomed in on Richard's face, capturing his barely concealed fury and humiliation. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The charade was over. The curtain had well and truly fallen. The immediate aftermath was chaotic. The debate ended abruptly. News outlets exploded with the story of the silent witness and the damning recording. Richard's campaign imploded overnight. He issued denials, claimed the recording was doctored, taken out of context, but the damage was irreparable. Councilman Miller won the mayoral election by a landslide the following week. Prompted by the public outcry and Miller's earlier anonymous tip, which now gained significant credibility, the district attorney launched a formal investigation into Richard Davenport's campaign finances and his dealings with Johnson Properties. I left the studio quietly amidst the uproar, declining all requests for interviews. My purpose had been served. Later that week, I sat down with Emily in the quiet of my own room, the main house feeling like a tomb Richard now barely occupied. She was numb, devastated, grappling with the public humiliation. Gently, without malice, I told her there was more she needed to know for her own sake. I showed her the picture on my phone, the messages from Jessica. Seeing the concrete proof of his infidelity, on top of the public exposure of his cruelty and corruption, finally broke through Emily's years of denial. The grief was immense, but beneath it, I saw the first flicker of anger, of clarity. Within a month, Emily filed for divorce. Richard, facing potential criminal charges and wanting to avoid further scandal, agreed to a swift and surprisingly generous settlement, desperate to make it all go away. A year has passed since that tumultuous night. Life has found a new, quieter rhythm. Richard Davenport vanished from public life. The investigation resulted in hefty fines and sanctions, though he narrowly avoided jail time through legal maneuvering. His reputation, however, was permanently ruined. He moved out of state, licking his wounds in obscurity. Emily is slowly rebuilding her life. The divorce was finalized, and she sold the large, cold house that held so many unhappy memories. She's in therapy, working through the complex emotions of betrayal, grief, and anger. Our relationship is healing. Tentatively, there's a new honesty between us, born from shared pain and the eventual acknowledgement of difficult truths. She understands now, not just what Richard did, but why I did what I had to do. There is forgiveness and a cautious hope for the future. As for me, I moved out of the guest suite almost immediately after the debate. Using some of the settlement money Emily insisted I take, supplemented by my own modest savings and the sale of some furniture I had stored, I found a lovely, bright apartment in a quiet building near a park. It is small, but it is mine, filled with my books, Arthur's favorite armchair, and blessed peace. I no longer feel like a burden or a piece of decor. I feel like Grace Peterson again. And I finally fulfilled a dream Arthur and I once shared. With a significant portion of the funds, I established the Arthur Peterson Memorial Reading Room, a small, independent library and community space located in a repurposed storefront downtown. It's warm, welcoming, filled with comfortable chairs and shelves, brimming with books donated by the community. We host book clubs for seniors, story time for children, literacy tutoring. Emily helped me set it up, arranging shelves, sorting donations, her quiet support a balm to old wounds. Yesterday, we had the official opening. Emily stood beside me, smiling genuinely as I cut the simple ribbon. Later, sitting in a comfortable chair by the window, watching people browse the shelves, the afternoon sun warming my face, I glanced down at the watch on my wrist. Always A. It ticked steadily, faithfully, just as it had through all those silent years. Sometimes the deepest wounds are inflicted not by fists, but by words whispered in supposed privacy, words designed to diminish, to erase. For years I absorbed those words, letting them chip away at me, but the silence I was forced into eventually became my strength, my shield becoming my sword. Recording those words was not about revenge. Not entirely. It was about reclaiming my voice, my story, my truth from the man who tried to steal them. It was about proving that even a burden, even a silent witness, has inherent value and deserves to be heard. It was about choosing honesty over the suffocating comfort of denial. Arthur would have understood. He would have been proud. And finally, after so long, I feel a measure of peace. The silence is no longer armor. It is simply quiet. And it is golden. Thank you for sharing this journey with me today. Your presence means the world. If Grace's story resonated with you, please give this video a like, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe so you do not miss our next story. We have many more confessions and tales of resilience coming your way. Until next time, take care.